Welcome back for more Reddit story videos. Today we have several nuclear revenge stories for you to enjoy. As always, don't forget to share and like if you enjoy these videos. Without further ado, here we go. I got the call center shut down. When I was a freshman in college, I took my first office job working for a large company doing contract work to a partially owned subsidiary in the mobile phone industry. It was the 90s and the world of mobile phones was in its days of every local telco still being separated from the divestiture when they broke up Mobile. You had tons of available companies to choose from instead of the big four and their MVNOs. Coverage maps looks like someone sneezed on them instead of the coverage you had now. There was no data, no text, and 100 voice minutes was enough for most anybody. It was the Wild West in telecom. The job paid well enough and hours allowed me to go to my classes. The job was fairly easy. We were tasked with activating new accounts. This required us to run credit checks and collect deposits when necessary. In the spring and summer, things were relatively calm. The only rule that really upset me was that we were not allowed to read anything outside the company intranet during downtime, and this meant I couldn't knock out coursework. No big. Come November, they wanted us to work more and more overtime to ramp up for the upcoming holiday season. This I could not do as I was hanging on balancing a full course load in addition to working the requisite 40 hours. They instituted a demand for at least 10 hours overtime a week. We were a small part of the building as we took up less than half of one of the 4 floors and were the only company there that was not a defense contractor. The contractors were all pretty cool, even if the MPs on floor 3 and 4 were a bit hard-assed and they were nice to talk to on breaks. We had no room to expand. The office was only open from 8 to 2 AM. Because of the demand for overtime, they instituted desk sharing, but because still didn't have enough desks, they couldn't seat everybody. I worked days and they wanted me to stay until 7 PM. This meant that the person with whom I share a desk that would normally start at 1 o'clock had no place to sit, and as they were also expected to work the overtime, that they would show up for 2 hours early and sit in the break room until I left. I couldn't understand why they would pay this guy 2 hours of base pay and 2 hours of overtime to sit in the break room and twiddle their thumbs, but they determined that would be better than having me get out on time. Eventually, I had to tell them I was quitting since I couldn't do the demanded overtime. I left and figured that was that. They called back 2 days after I left and asked if I would come back to work. I said I would on the condition that I would not be expected to work the OT, and they said we would talk about it when I came back in. I show up and they pulled me aside and said that they will still need me to do the OT. I told them that was impossible and there was no point to having asked me back if I had to work it. We were at an impasse, so I quit for the second time within a week. The company started asking for more and more overtime of the remaining employees. A bunch of these folks had families and it was to their delight that they were then being offered hundreds of dollars in bonuses for breaking certain OT thresholds. Their kids would have the best Christmases of their lives. Cars were being paid off early and down payments for mortgages were racking up. Come January, the overtime's gone as there was no need for it. People are settling back into their former routines and payday arrives. From my friends that stayed working there, they said that the envelopes were opened and there were audible gasps coming from across the floors. Paychecks were being issued for $0 to a large number of employees. One got a paycheck for 15 cents. The shock quickly turns to anger and the floor erupts. Management came out and addressed everybody and told them that the bonuses they offered were not approved by the company and that the money had to be reclaimed. People were expected to work and collect checks for no money until the bonuses they were overpaid were paid back to the company, and that anybody that left would be sued by the company for the outstanding balance. They still even told one guy that he was lucky enough to have a job there at all since they normally only hired people with diplomas and he was a dropout without GED. A number of those employees were still friends and relayed all this to me. I had just started a new job working as a third-party support for a portion of the company to which I was previously contracted and did night hours to coincide with my new classes. I asked if they minded if I referred some contacts to them if it would get this resolved, and they said it was fine. I then spoke with a few people that I knew with the defense contractors who were able to refer me to friends they had that worked with the IRS, since they would be interested with it kicking off a new tax year. I explained to the IRS what happened and provided them contact from my friends. 1 month later, after an investigation, the full force of government came down upon the company. The IRS came in and demanded to speak with everybody that made the decision to withhold pay from employees to rescind the bonuses. I was eventually determined that everybody above a certain level was complicit in the scheme and would be held to account by being forced out and facing potential jail time. Company was informed that all of the monies would be repaid to those from whom it was taken. Anybody that quit so they could get a job that would give them a paycheck in the meantime was to be offered their job back, and should they refuse to take it, would be issued full-time payback from the date of their departure. They also determined that the company would either have to fire all of those responsible, or the company would be responsible for penalties that were obscenely high. The company thought they had their ace in the hole when they said that without the managers allowed to stay on, they would have to close the call center. They were informed that closing it was fine, since the final stipulation was that all employees that were not involved in the scam would either be offered the chance to move to the office they had a county over, or would be offered very generous severance packages. The company opted to move the employees and shut the call center. Plea bargains were made, everyone but the offenders went home happy. Think this deserved nuclear revenge. Basically make her evil stepmom homeless. How I screwed my stepmom over the moment I had the legal option to do so. Hey, r/prorevenge. After first finding many YouTubers reading stories from here and then reading some myself, I finally decided to try posting my own revenge story. Since it's my first time posting, please be lenient with any formatting or spelling errors, TLDR at the bottom. Backstory. I'm sorry it's long, but some context is needed. When I was about 9-10, my parents got a separation. Later a divorce where my dad forced my mom to sell my childhood home. And my mom got main custody with my dad having us. They had me and my 4 years younger sister over every other weekend, plus every other holiday. He moved out only to immediately move in with the stepmonster and her 3 kids. The youngest was 2 years younger than me and a boy. The middle a year older than me and female, and I'm not sure about the oldest age, but she was also female. I never interacted much with her. In an ideal world, us 4 kids would have gotten along great, played together and whatnot, or at least ignore the existence of the others. Sadly, it's not an ideal world, and that didn't happen. My sister got along with them just fine, I didn't. Maybe it was my then still undiagnosed Asperger syndrome, maybe it was me not instantly going, yay, new family, but the Steph siblings didn't like me. They started bullying me, and my little sister joined in cause she adored her new step family and was just 7 at the time. Over the first 6 months, the bullying got worse and worse, until I broke and tried to call home and get picked up. At which point my dad decided to start confiscating my phone as the first thing he did when picking us up. The bullying escalated even more. There was nothing I could do. The stepmonster defended her precious demon spawn, calling me a liar and saying things like, my kids said they didn't, whatever they did or said to hurt me that day, or she's just lying for attention. During the next year, I would try to run away from my dad's place a few more times to go to family. They lived less than 40 minutes walk away from an aunt and about 1.5 hours from my grandparents. Then my dad and the stepmonster moved over 2 hours by car away from where my mom lived. Things got so bad that I dreaded going to see my dad. Sitting at every dinner, the only time I would see my dad at that point between pickup and drop off, listening to my dad calling my mom a fat greedy pig and the other evil things hurt. At 12, 13, I was suicidal and numb, since I would only see the stepmonster mostly when she told me to get the heck out and play or something, just get out of the house. I tried telling her that I wanted to die, that I didn't want to keep living like this anymore. Her response, I don't care, get the F outside already. If you're already going to kill yourself, do it outside. Not long after that, I had a meltdown at school, crying for hours and unleashing the whole nasty tale onto them. Since my school was a good one, the teacher contacted CPS, who talked with me, ran some tests and sent me to a psychologist. At some point, they contacted my dad with their concerns for my mental and emotional well-being. My dad dealt with it by calling me, saying, since you feel the need to lie like that, you shouldn't come visit anymore. Stay with your mom, I don't care. That was my last conversation with him, although I heard a lot about him and the stepmonster from my sister. Now for my revenge. 10 years or so later, I get a phone call from my dad's sister about him passing, car accident, and funeral. I went and I met with the stepmonster again, obviously widowed now, and my half-brother for the first time. During the funeral and following wake, she proceeds to insult me, my mom, and the rest of dad's family. Then she starts complaining about how his name is on everything they had together and how is she going to keep the house. It was paid down but taxes and whatnot. Now, she never worked a day in her life and such thing. Which is where my revenge comes to play. See, In my country, the children of the deceased have a right to claim a minimum of $115,000 each, if there is that much money or value in good left behind and there is no will stating otherwise. Normally, this claim comes after the deceased spouse also dies or when they try to sell the property worth the money, whichever comes first. Normally, legally the children can claim it at any time. They just don't cause decency and pity for the widow. Too bad I hate her guts and both the youngest step-siblings. As it so happens, my dad and the stepmonster owned some award-winning show dogs, the house and the land and a car. The stepmonster also got some insurance money, plus she will get a sum of about 60% of what my dad would earn if he was still alive every month. If my dad had a will, she could have kept it all of that for herself or my half-brother. He didn't. And by that time my sister also hated her guts. So I talked to her and did the only thing I could think of. We took her to court to claim our inheritance. Sure, we got many looks of disgust and mutters of greediness, but in the end we won and I got my share of the money. My sister got hers and our half-brother got his, locked in a trust fund for when he turns 18. This meant the house, dogs and car had to be sold. The insurance money also got split, so us kids each got $115,000 each in a trust fund for my half-brother. As for my stepmonster, she got around $1,000 and a monthly sum of around $3,700. She was livid, started screaming venomous shit, saying I should have killed myself when I was considering, and how is she going to live now? She have no house, and how dare you force me to sell Grimmer, obviously fake name for my half-brother's childhood home, and calling me a bitch and other things. The judge had to threaten her with contempt of court and get her escorted out before she stopped. Wanna insult and beat up my little brother because of his mental issues? Okay, prepare for the beating of your life. I posted this on prorevenge, but it was removed due to having felonies on stories. I don't know if it belongs on Nuclear, so feel free to inform me if it doesn't belong here. For context, this story takes place before I was born. My father told me these stories many times when I was younger. Another context, my father wasn't a witness, but his friend told him the story so detailed since they were there when it happened that it almost sounds like he was there, so here we go. Cast: Cage, asshole who verbally and physically attacks someone with mental health issues. Daniel, poor guys who semi-mentally challenged, I'll explain later. Finn Johnson, Daniel's big brother. The name will make sense when I explain it. Story. Okay, I don't know which year this took place as my dad never specified that, but I know this took place when he was in his late teens and or early 20s. Okay, there was this guy Daniel who was, well, semi-mentally challenged. When I say semi, I mean occasionally he was able to successfully understand the situation around him, but the majority of the time he couldn't. Because of that, his friend group constantly protected him, not out of pity, but because they genuinely cared about him. However, this one jerk-face Cage decided he didn't like Daniel's mental issues and decided to poke fun at him. Note, they were at a bar and Cage had a large group of friends with him who all forced Daniel's friends to back off, since they were taller and thus were intimidated, although they kept close just in case things went south. And they assumed a verbal assault would be the furthest that this would go. How wrong they were. Cage decided to poke fun at Daniel, making stupid noises at him, purposely talking all wrong and broken as a way to mock his difficulty to speak due to his issues, and well, everything else you can imagine. But like I said, Daniel most of the time wasn't able to pick up the things around him and thus wasn't faced by the insults, since he couldn't really understand what was going on. This seemingly upset Cage, who then resulted in beating the ever-loving hell out of Daniel. Daniel's friends immediately tossed aside their intimidation of Cage's friends and tried to stop him, but were restrained by Cage's friends while poor Daniel was defenseless against Cage's beating. 2 minutes later, Cage stops the beating, laughs at Daniel and kicks his foot one last time before leaving with his buddies. Daniel's friends take him away to a hospital and inform his parents and older brother. Daniel's brother, will call him Vin Johnson. Why? Because if you take Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, fuse them together, that's Daniel's brother. That's how buffed and jacked he was. He went full Papa Bear mode, seeing red at his beloved little brother being beaten to a pulp and demanded to know who did it. And Daniel's friends informed him and Vin immediately returned to the bar a day later and from I was told literally kicked the door open and loudly and aggressively asked, I was told this part so many times and the words are quite exact, "Who the F beat my brother up yesterday? Which one of you effers did it? Start talking or I will tear this place piece by piece." Despite Vin's Hulk-like stature and Darth Vader levels of deep voice, Cage wasn't scared and smugly walked up and told him, "I did it, what you gonna do about it?" Without less than a 0.00001 second later, Vin punched Cage so hard he actually flew back a couple feet. Vin stomped over to Cage and continued to beat him up, as in, he stood above a fallen Cage and rained punches like those you see in the movies. Then he picked him up and threw him into a wall before grabbing him by the hair and smashing his head onto the pool table several times. Finally, Cage friends interfered, although they were all beaten up by Vin. Seriously, it was like 5 versus 1. Yet, Vin whooped their asses. According to my father, whose friends were there and were watching the whole thing, Vin took 2 of Cage's friends, lifted them both up with one hand, each by the throat, and smashed their heads onto a glass portrait, knocking them both out instantly and leaving them with several cuts from the falling glass. Then, Vin finished off Cage's remaining friends before returning his attention to Cage himself, who was literally dragging himself across the floor in fear, and as Vin grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, Cage begged him to stop. But Vin sarcastically asked him if his little brother Daniel also begged him to stop, and Vin continued to beat the shit out of him. And even after Cage was knocked out, with his face covered in blood and a few teeth knocked out, Vin continued to beat him up and was only stopped by Daniel's friends, who told him to stop, otherwise he could kill him. And Vin actually said, "I still don't see the problem." The bartender was indeed watching, but knowing what a POS Cage was, decided not to do anything. Yep, Cage was that much of an asshole, but since he paid for beer almost every day, the bartender wouldn't throw him out. Then, Vin decided to end the beating by picking the now unconscious Cage one last time and threw him across the bar, and Cage's head smashed against a jukebox, or something like that. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was something related to music. Vin and Daniel's friends walked away and the bartender called an ambulance for Cage and his friends. A few weeks later, Daniel was dispatched from the hospital and only suffered bruises, but was overall alright. When Daniel's friends returned to the bar sometime later, they asked the bartender if he knew what happened to Cage and his friends, and the bartender actually knew almost everything that happened. Apparently, Cage's parents decided to find out what actually happened, since one of Cage's eyes had suffered so much damage he actually became blind in one eye, and asked for security footage. But the bar didn't have cameras, so there was nothing. However, the bartender actually came clean and told them all that happened, and what Cage has done to deserve the beating. Surprisingly, the parents weren't entitled, what a miracle, and understood the situation and asked the bartender to tell Vin and his families they were sorry for their son's behavior and promised to update him on Cage's future to inform Daniel's family about Cage's punishment. Then, according to the bartender, Cage's parents refused to take him back home and literally threw him out on the streets, telling him that if he was willing to beat a defenseless person, then he too shall become defenseless, without support from his family. Cage then became homeless and his friends abandoned him and became a loner homeless. One day, Vin actually passed by Cage while driving his car, and since it had been a day after a rainy day, there were water puddles around, and Vin purposely drove over one which splashed over to Cage, making him completely soaked in dirty water. Cage began cursing at him, but as Vin slowed down and looked over, Cage recognized Vin and legged it. Not too long after, Cage was arrested for trying to steal food off a local market, and his parents actually further added to his sentence over the beating he would give to Daniel, making Cage spend some good quality time in jail. After getting out, however, Cage was finally allowed to go back home, but was never allowed to go out without his parents again until he got himself a job, a house of his own, and a life of his own. So those were the stories for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be highly appreciated. It really does help my channel out. Also, if you enjoyed this and want to stay up to date on the latest videos, then don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next video.